Hey everyone! This is a quick reminder to subscribe and hit that like button. It lets me know that you are enjoying my content. Also, feel free to drop your suggestions for future stories in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and let's dive right in. The rumble of the truck beneath me had become as familiar as my own heartbeat over the years. I'd spent most of my adult life behind the wheel, crisscrossing the country with nothing but the open road and my thoughts. In those years, I'd seen my fair share of odd things. Flashing lights in the middle of nowhere, animals that seemed to appear out of thin air, even a couple of so-called ghost sightings. I always chalked them up to exhaustion or the tricks of the highway at night. But none of that could have prepared me for the highway I was about to take. It started with a call from my manager, Tony. I was on my way back to the yard after a long haul, thinking about nothing more than a hot shower and a couple of days off. Instead, I got hit with the offer of a last-minute job. Sky, pays double the usual rate. You interested? Tony's voice was unusually serious, like he was bracing for me to say no. Double? I repeated, eyebrows raised. What's the catch? Tony paused, which immediately set me on edge. It's headed to a small town near Rachel, Nevada. You'll need to take Route 375 to get there. Never been on it, I said, trying to place the route in my mind. Yeah, most people haven't, he muttered, like he was hoping I wouldn't catch it. It's out of the way, but it's the fastest route to the drop-off point. The load's time-sensitive, so there's no wiggle room on the schedule. There was something in his tone, hesitation, maybe even guilt. I couldn't pin it down, but it made my gut tighten. Why the double pay, Tony? It's not the easiest route, he admitted finally. But you're a pro, Sky. You can handle it. I didn't press him further. Work had been slow the past few months, and double pay wasn't something I could pass up. All right, I said, send me the details. The job was simple enough on paper: haul a fully loaded trailer of equipment to a distribution center just outside Rachel. Pickup was at 6 a.m., and I had until midnight to get there. I'd driven worse schedules. The morning started like any other. After grabbing the trailer, I hit the road, my GPS guiding me toward Route 375. Tony wasn't kidding, it was remote. Miles of nothing but desert stretched out before me, the horizon shimmering in the heat. The solitude was almost calming, like the world had shrunk down to just me and the truck. By midday, I found myself settling into the rhythm of the drive. The monotony of the landscape was broken only by the occasional tumbleweed or a distant mountain range. I had the radio on low, a mix of classic rock and static keeping me company. Still, something about the route gnawed at me. Maybe it was Tony's tone on the phone, or the fact that I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd agreed to something I didn't fully understand. It wasn't until I hit the next rest stop that the uneasy feeling really started to creep in. The rest stop came into view just as the late afternoon sun began to dip low enough to cast long shadows across the desert. I was relieved to see it. My legs were stiff, and my stomach had been growling for the last hour. It was one of those surprisingly busy spots, with trucks parked in neat rows and a gas station attached to a diner that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 80s. I pulled into a spot near the pumps, climbed down from the cab, and stretched until my back gave a satisfying pop. The air was still and heavy, the kind of heat that clung to your skin and made you dream of air conditioning. The diner was crowded, and I had to weave between tables to find an open seat. I placed my order quickly, a burger, fries, and a soda, and leaned back, letting the hum of chatter wash over me. It wasn't until the food arrived that I noticed the man standing nearby, looking a little out of place with his dusty boots and a faded baseball cap. Mind if I sit? He asked, gesturing to the empty spot across from me. Sure, I said, more out of politeness than anything else. He slid into the booth and offered a small smile. Name's Jack, passing through like everyone else. Sky, I said, taking a sip of my soda. On a run to Rachel. Rachel? His smile faltered and his eyes narrowed slightly. You're taking Route 375 then? I nodded, not sure where he was going with this. Driving it at night? Yeah. Why? He glanced around, lowering his voice as if we were sharing state secrets. You ever hear anything about that highway? Nope. First time driving it, I said, popping a fry into my mouth. Jack leaned in closer, his face serious. Look, I don't know how to say this without sounding like a lunatic, But that road's dangerous, and I'm not talking about sharp turns or bad pavement. People disappear out there. Whole trucks, cars, even hikers, gone without a trace, always at night. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. You're serious? Dead serious. A nervous laugh slipped out before I could stop it. You realize how crazy that sounds, right? Trucks don't just vanish. Jack didn't laugh. If anything, his face grew more grim. Call it crazy if you want, but I've lived in this area my whole life. I've heard the stories. Hell, I've known people who've disappeared out there. They say there are rules to follow if you're going to drive it at night. Rules? He nodded. The most important one. Don't stop. No matter what you see, no matter what's in the road, don't stop until you reach the other end. I couldn't help but smirk. Sounds like something out of a campfire story. Jack didn't seem amused. Maybe, but do yourself a favor and wait until morning. It's not worth the risk. I thanked him for the advice and finished my meal, trying to shake off the unease his words had left behind. After paying, I wandered into the gas station to stock up on snacks and coffee for the night ahead. The place was packed with other drivers, most of them chatting in groups or flipping through road maps. While waiting in line, I couldn't help but overhear a conversation between two truckers behind me. Poor Lenny, one of them said, shaking his head. Should have known better than to take that road at night. Damn shame. The other replied. He was a good driver, never broke the rules before. I turned slightly, pretending to adjust my hat as I eavesdropped. Think they'll find him? Doubt it. No one ever comes back. But you know how it goes. Long as you follow the rules, you're fine. The cashier snapped me out of my thoughts. That'll be $23.89, she said. I handed over the cash and carried my bag of supplies back to the truck, my mind buzzing. The stories were starting to pile up, and as much as I wanted to laugh it all off, something about the way Jack and the other drivers had spoken stuck with me. Sitting in the cab, I opened my phone and searched Route 375 disappearances. A flood of forums and articles popped up, detailing everything from missing persons reports to wild theories about alien abductions and government experiments. One post caught my eye, a list of rules for driving the highway at night. The first one was bolded and repeated 3 times. Do not stop. The rest were just as ominous. Don't pick up hitchhikers. Ignore anything you see in the mirrors. If you hear knocking, don't roll down your window. I closed the browser and stared out at the horizon, the sun dipping lower with every passing minute. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine twinge of fear about the road ahead. But fear wasn't going to stop me. I had a schedule to keep, and I wasn't about to let ghost stories and local gossip make me late. As I started the truck and pulled out of the rest stop, I couldn't shake Jack's words. Don't stop. It sounded simple enough. How hard could it be? The sun dipped below the horizon as I merged back onto Route 375. The sky blazed orange for a brief, fleeting moment before fading into the deep blues and purples of dusk. By the time full darkness descended, I was the only vehicle on the road. No headlights in my rearview mirror, no taillights ahead. Just me, my truck, and miles of lonely highway stretching into the black void. I cranked up the radio, hoping a little music would keep me from overthinking. Jack's warning still lingered in the back of my mind, but I brushed it off like an annoying fly. A lifetime of trucking teaches you that people love to exaggerate, especially in small towns. Still, as I glanced out at the vast emptiness surrounding me, it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. The road was smooth, freshly paved in some sections, but I noticed something peculiar as the minutes ticked by. There were no exits. Not a single one. Just endless asphalt flanked by barren desert. I knew some highways could go a long way without turnoffs. But this was unusual. The darkness was different too. Thicker, almost tangible. My high beams barely cut through it, and it felt like they were being swallowed by something. I tried not to think about it too much, focusing instead on the comforting rhythm of the engine and the wheels beneath me. It must have been an hour or two before the first strange thing happened. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, a flash of movement on the road ahead. At first, I thought it was my imagination, maybe a shadow from a passing cloud or a trick of the light. But as I approached, my stomach dropped. It was a deer. Standing dead center in my lane, its head turned toward me like it was waiting for something. I slammed my hand on the horn, the blaring sound cutting through the eerie silence. The deer didn't flinch, it just stared, its eyes glowing faintly in the beam of my headlights. I had no time to react. My foot instinctively moved to the brake, but I remembered Jack's words, the warnings from the forums, "Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop." My heart pounded in my chest as I pressed down harder on the gas pedal. The impact came seconds later, a sickening thud that vibrated through the truck. I screamed, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Something, a leg, maybe, flew past my windshield and disappeared into the darkness. I didn't stop. The logical part of my brain screamed at me to pull over and check the damage, but the fear, the cold, primal fear rooted me to my seat. My foot stayed on the gas, and I kept going, my breathing ragged and my eyes darting to every shadow. How the hell didn't I see it? I muttered to myself, glancing down at my high beams. They were on, as bright as they could be, but it was like the deer had materialized out of nowhere. My pulse was racing, and I could feel the sweat trickling down the back of my neck. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the crumpled body of the deer lying on the road behind me. But there was nothing. No blood. No body. Nothing. What the hell? My voice trailed off as a wave of nausea hit me. I tightened my grip on the wheel, forcing myself to focus on the road ahead. The emptiness around me felt heavier now, like the night was pressing in on all sides. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. That something was watching me from the darkness, just out of sight. Shaking my head, I tried to reason with myself. It was just a deer. I must have missed it in the dark, distracted by my own thoughts. I'd seen worse things on the road. Animals darting out, accidents I'd passed by after the fact. This was no different. But deep down, I knew it was different. I turned up the radio again, desperate for something to drown out the uneasy silence. Static filled the cab, followed by a song cutting in and out. I couldn't even make out the melody. Frustrated, I jabbed at the dial until I found a news station, the announcer's monotone voice a small comfort. "Just keep driving," I told myself. "You'll be at the next stop soon." But as the minutes dragged into hours, the road remained desolate. No signs, no exits, no mile markers, just the same endless stretch of asphalt and the oppressive weight of the night. I caught myself glancing in the mirrors again, half hoping and half dreading that I'd see something. But there was nothing behind me. Nothing at all. I gritted my teeth and stared straight ahead. I couldn't afford to lose focus. Not now. Not when everything inside me screamed that something wasn't right. Whatever this was, I wasn't stopping. I didn't care what I saw next. I wasn't going to stop. The endless highway stretched ahead of me, silent and empty, except for the faint hum of my truck's engine. I hadn't seen another soul in hours. No headlights, no taillights. Nothing. The longer I drove, the more the road felt like some kind of void, stretching on forever, defying the logic of distance and time. I shook my head, trying to keep my thoughts steady. Exhaustion nipped at the edges of my focus, and I couldn't tell if the nausea building in my gut was from the adrenaline or something worse. The deer still lingered in my mind. How it had appeared out of nowhere, how there was no sign of it afterward. My brain kept trying to make sense of it, but there was no sense to be found. The silence was shattered by a flicker of light ahead. At first, I thought my tired eyes were playing tricks on me, but as I got closer, I saw the unmistakable strobe of hazard lights. A car. It was pulled off to the side of the road, a little too close to the shoulder, with two figures huddled around one of the tires. A man and a woman, from what I could tell, though the dim glow of my headlights didn't offer much detail. The man was crouched low, fiddling with the lug nuts, while the woman stood nearby with her arms crossed, occasionally glancing at the road. She looked up as my truck approached, her face briefly illuminated by the headlights. Her expression was off. Not frantic like you'd expect from someone stranded, but tense. Like she was waiting for something. My foot hovered over the brake for a split second before I forced it back to the gas. Don't stop. The rule echoed in my head, louder than my own thoughts. My hands clenched the wheel as I sped past the car, eyes fixed on the road ahead. In my peripheral vision, I caught a glimpse of the man standing up, turning slightly toward me. I exhaled a shaky breath once the car disappeared in my mirrors, the glowing hazard swallowed by the darkness. That was normal, I told myself out loud, as if hearing the words would make them true. Just a couple of people with a flat tire. Happens all the time. But I couldn't shake the unease. Something about the way they moved, the way the woman's eyes lingered on my truck, it didn't sit right. I pushed the thought aside and kept driving. A few minutes later, the road dipped slightly, and as I crested the next hill, I saw them again. Blinking hazard lights, the same car, the same two people. I slowed down, my heart pounding against my ribs. It had to be a different car, right? Maybe another breakdown just coincidentally close to the last one. But as I drew nearer, my stomach sank. It was the same. The man was crouched by the same tire, twisting the lug wrench in slow, deliberate movements. The woman stood just behind him. Arms crossed in the same position, her head turning toward me at the exact same angle as before. I sped up, my hands trembling on the wheel. My brain scrambled for a logical explanation, but none came. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I passed, half expecting the car to vanish the moment it left my sight. But it didn't vanish. It was waiting for me again just a few minutes later. The third time I saw it, my chest tightened and I could barely breathe. The scene was identical. Same car, same hazards, same man crouched over the tire, same woman staring me down with an expression that now felt wrong. I didn't slow down this time. If anything, I sped up. The rumble of the truck's engine filled the cab, but it wasn't enough to drown out the pounding in my ears. "This isn't happening," I muttered under my breath. "It's not real. It's not real." But it was real. When I saw them the fourth time, something had changed. They were moving in perfect unison. The man twisted the lug wrench. The woman adjusted her crossed arms, both of them shifting in a way that felt mechanical. Their movements were too smooth, too synchronized, like marionettes controlled by the same set of strings. My breath hitched as I drove past them again, my headlights casting fleeting, flickering shadows. I was too afraid to look directly at them, but out of the corner of my eye, I could see their heads turning in perfect sync, following me as I passed. And then I saw them everywhere. The road ahead was lined with identical cars, each one pulled over in the exact same position, each pair of people performing the same eerie motions. It was like a nightmare come to life. A broken film reel where the same scene played over and over, distorted and wrong. As I drove faster, the cars began to flicker, their outlines stuttering like a scratched DVD. The people's faces blurred, shifting between static smiles and blank, hollow expressions. And then, as I passed the last pair, the man stopped. He stood up slowly, his movements jerky, his head snapping toward me like a glitching animatronic. The woman didn't move. She just stood there, frozen, as the man's face twisted into a grin. It wasn't a normal grin, it was too wide, too sharp, stretching his mouth unnaturally across his face. I didn't dare look back. My foot pressed the gas pedal to the floor, and the truck roared as it picked up speed. The road was empty again, but my heart didn't slow. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the rows of flickering cars still there, but there was nothing, just an empty highway. I was alone again, but I didn't feel alone. Not anymore. The highway was empty again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My hands were locked on the wheel, knuckles pale, and my eyes darted between the road ahead and the mirrors. Each time I glanced back, the same stretch of asphalt stretched out behind me, clean and barren. But my gut told me I wasn't alone. The night pressed in heavier now, the darkness thicker, like it was swallowing the world around me. My headlights cut through it, but the beams seemed weaker, dimmer. Even the stars overhead were gone, smothered by a cloudless black void. I told myself to keep driving. If I stopped, I didn't know what might happen. A flash of movement up ahead made me tense. Another car. This one was pulled over on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking rhythmically in the dark. I felt my pulse quicken as I drew closer. The shapes of two people came into view. A man and a woman. No, not just any man and woman. Them. The same two figures from the looping cars. The same man crouched near a tire, the same woman standing just behind him, arms crossed. But this time, they weren't static. They were arguing. The woman was yelling, her voice cutting sharply through the silence as I rolled closer. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but her words carried a frantic, desperate edge. She gestured wildly toward the man, who stood now, holding something heavy in his hands. The lug wrench. I slowed just enough to take it in, my breath catching in my throat. They were different now. Their movements were erratic, raw with emotion. This wasn't the cold, robotic synchronicity I'd seen before. This was something primal, The woman took a step back, shaking her head, her hands outstretched as if pleading. The man advanced toward her, his grip tightening on the wrench. I didn't want to see where this was going. I pressed the gas, but my truck seemed to crawl forward, like the air itself was dragging me back. The argument reached its peak as I passed. The woman screamed, a sound so raw it sliced through my chest. And then, with one brutal swing, the man brought the wrench down. I flinched, my stomach turning as I caught the sickening thud in my peripheral vision. The woman crumpled to the ground, motionless. My foot slammed the gas pedal, but my truck barely gained speed. I couldn't stop looking in my mirrors. The man stood over her body, his shoulders heaving as if he were breathing hard, though his expression never changed. And then he turned toward me. His face lit up in the glow of my taillights, and I felt a chill crawl down my spine. That grin. It was the same impossible, too-wide grin I'd seen before, splitting his face unnaturally. His eyes locked on me, sharp and unblinking, even as the truck carried me farther away. Then he moved. The man broke into a sprint, his body lurching forward in unnatural bursts of speed. My heart slammed against my ribs as I pressed the pedal harder, willing the truck to go faster. He didn't stop. I watched in horror as he gained on me, his figure growing larger in the mirror. His movements were jerky, like something out of a broken animation, his limbs bending in ways they shouldn't as he closed the distance. And then he leaped. I screamed as his body slammed into the side of the cab, the impact rattling the truck and throwing me off balance. My hands jerked the wheel, and the truck swerved violently, the tires screeching against the asphalt. I struggled to regain control, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The truck veered back onto the road, and I gripped the wheel like a lifeline, forcing it straight. When I dared to glance out the window, there was nothing there. No man. No body. Just the empty road and the endless darkness. I glanced in the mirrors again, half expecting to see him clinging to the back of the truck or running after me. But the highway was empty. Still, the sensation of his presence lingered, like an invisible weight pressing down on me. My hands shook as I steadied the truck and pushed forward, my thoughts racing. Those warnings I'd laughed off, the stories of disappearances, the rules, weren't just folklore. This highway was wrong, and I was deep in its grip now. Whatever I'd seen back there, whatever was playing with me, wasn't finished. I tightened my grip on the wheel and kept my eyes on the road. The truck roared down the highway, the engine's hum the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. My grip on the wheel was tighter than ever, and my pulse was relentless, hammering in my ears. I couldn't stop replaying what I'd seen. The man, his unnaturally wide grin, the thud against the cab. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to keep going, not to look back, not to stop for anything. But then I saw them. Two small figures appeared in the distance, faint and blurry in the wash of my headlights. As I drew closer, they sharpened into the unmistakable shapes of children. A boy and a girl, standing by the side of the road. The boy looked to be around 10, lanky and pale, with a shock of dark hair that fell into his eyes. The little girl clung to his side, maybe 5 or 6, her small hand gripping his jacket like her life depended on it. Her face was streaked with tears, her cheeks blotchy and red. They stood there, motionless, staring into my headlights. I slowed instinctively, my foot hesitating over the brake. Every part of me screamed that this was wrong, that it was another trap, another game this highway was playing. But they were just kids. I couldn't just drive past them, no matter how wrong it felt. I pulled over, my stomach churning as I brought the truck to a stop a few feet ahead of them. The cab shuddered as I put it in park, and for a moment I sat frozen, my hands gripping the wheel, my heart pounding. What was I doing? The boy moved first, taking the girl's hand and leading her toward the passenger side of the truck. I rolled down the window, leaning over to get a better look. "You two okay?" I asked, my voice shaky. The boy nodded, though his expression didn't change. His face was blank, almost too calm for a kid standing in the middle of nowhere at night. "Our car broke down," he said. His voice was soft, measured, and eerily even. "Mom and Dad sent us to find help." I glanced past them into the darkness, searching for any sign of a car, a family, something to make this make sense. But there was nothing. Just the endless road and the heavy black void beyond it. The girl whimpered, pressing closer to her brother. "Please," the boy said. "She's scared. Can we ride with you?" My throat tightened. Every instinct I had told me to say no, to roll up the window and drive away. But the girl's wide, tear-streaked eyes pinned me in place, filling me with a suffocating wave of guilt. I couldn't leave them out here. "Get in," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The boy opened the door and helped his sister climb up into the cab. She settled into the seat beside me, her small hands clutching her brother's arm as he climbed in after her. I shut the door, the sound echoing louder than I expected in the stillness. "Thank you," the boy said, his voice polite but flat. I pulled back onto the highway, the truck rumbling forward into the darkness. The silence in the cab was thick and uncomfortable. The little girl sniffled quietly, wiping her nose on her sleeve. The boy sat stiffly beside her, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed straight ahead. "What happened to your car?" I asked, trying to break the tension. "Engine died," the boy said without looking at me. "Mom and Dad stayed behind. They told us to find help." I nodded, though his answer didn't sit right with me. Why would their parents send two kids out alone in the middle of the night? As if reading my thoughts, the boy turned to me, his eyes sharp and knowing. "Why didn't you stop earlier?" he asked. My grip on the wheel tightened. "What do you mean?" "You drove past us before," he said, his voice low and cold. "You didn't stop. Mom needed help and you just kept driving." My heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" I stammered. I didn't see you before. This is the first time." The boy cut me off with a laugh, a sound so chilling it sent a shiver down my spine. "Liar," he said. I glanced at him, my breath catching in my throat. He was smiling now. That same impossibly wide, unnatural grin I'd seen on the man before. The little girl lifted her head, and I saw it on her face too, her lips stretched into that grotesque, inhuman smile. "Why did you let her die?" the boy asked, his voice rising, the words echoing in my head. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, he lunged. His hands shot toward me, clawing at the wheel, his face twisted with rage. The girl screamed, the sound high and piercing, like a siren blaring in my skull. I fought to keep control, but the truck swerved violently, the tires skidding across the asphalt. "Get off me!" I shouted, struggling against the boy's grip. The cab filled with chaos. The boy's snarls, the girl's screams, the blaring horn as my arms slammed against it. And then everything went black. When I came to, my hands were on the wheel, gripping it so tightly that my knuckles ached. My body was stiff, and a cold sweat clung to my skin like a second layer. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. The smooth, unbroken stretch of highway stretching ahead of me, the truck humming steadily beneath me, the faint glow of the dashboard lights. I blinked, trying to shake off the disorientation. The memories of the kids, the boy's smile, the girl's scream, the violent lurch of the truck as we swerved, flooded back in vivid detail. My stomach churned, and I felt bile rising in my throat. But when I glanced at the passenger seat, it was empty. No kids, no scratches on the dashboard, no blood. My breath hitched as I frantically scanned the cab, my hands patting down the seat and the console as if I'd find some trace of them. But everything was as it should have been, neat, clean, untouched. Even the road behind me, visible in the side mirrors, was empty. No car, no arguing couple, no hitchhiking kids. My heart pounded as I turned my attention back to the highway, my mind racing to make sense of what had happened. Had I imagined it all? Some sort of waking nightmare brought on by exhaustion? The clock on the dashboard caught my eye, and relief washed over me like a wave. 4:13 a.m. I let out a shaky breath, laughing weakly at myself. Maybe it was just a bad dream. Maybe I'd fallen asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing. And then I noticed something. The clock hadn't changed. I frowned, staring at it, waiting for the numbers to tick over to 4:14. But they didn't. The digital display remained frozen, unblinking, as if time itself had decided to take a break. A knot of unease tightened in my chest. My eyes flicked to the fuel gauge, hoping for something, anything, normal to latch onto. But the needle was stuck in the same spot it had been when I'd started driving, as though the truck hadn't burned a single drop of fuel this entire time. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. I reached for my phone, fumbling with it in my lap. The screen was dark, and no matter how many times I pressed the power button, it refused to come to life. Panic clawed at my throat. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, the truck lurching forward with a roar. I didn't care about the speed anymore. I just needed to get out of this. out of whatever this was. The road ahead was still empty, stretching into infinity, but the darkness around it felt heavier now, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. The faint glow of the moon and stars was gone, swallowed up by the void. My headlights barely seemed to cut through it, the beams of light fading after only a few feet. I turned on the radio, desperate for a voice, a song, anything to drown out the deafening silence. Static crackled through the speakers, sharp and grating. I twisted the dial, flipping through station after station, but it was all the same, static, endless, and unrelenting. And then I heard it. A whisper. Faint and indistinct, buried beneath the static. I froze, my hand hovering over the dial. The whisper came again, clearer this time, a single word, sky. My breath caught in my throat. It was my name. The voice was low and raspy, a quiet murmur that seemed to snake its way into my ears despite the static. Sky, it said again, dragging out the syllable like a snake hissing. My hands trembled as I reached for the radio, twisting the knob to turn it off. But no matter how hard I turned it, the whispers didn't stop. Sky, you can't leave. I slammed my fist against the dash, my breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. Shut up, I screamed, my voice cracking. The whispers only grew louder, overlapping and blending into a sinister cacophony. Sky, why didn't you stop? Why didn't you help? I pressed harder on the gas, the truck barreling forward as the speedometer climbed higher and higher. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to escape the whispers, the darkness, the endless road that felt like it was swallowing me whole. Tears blurred my vision as I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, my body trembling. The whispers were louder now, swirling around me like a storm. I could hear the boy's voice, the girl's sobs, the man's laughter, all of it blending together into a haunting symphony of accusations and despair. And beneath it all, a single chilling truth settled into my bones. I was trapped. This wasn't just a road, it was something else, something alive, something malicious. And it wasn't going to let me go. The first sign of trouble was the orange glow in the distance, piercing the suffocating darkness like a warning flare. It flickered and shimmered, hazy at first but growing sharper as I drew closer. I felt my stomach knot as I realized what I was seeing. The roadwork was back. The same cones, the same blinking barricades, the same rough patches of gravel and half-dug asphalt. It didn't make sense. I'd passed this hours ago, or days ago, or whatever this hellish loop counted as time. I slowed the truck, my headlights bouncing off the barricades and casting long shadows on the uneven ground. The whispers in the radio didn't stop, growing sharper, cutting deeper. Sky, you broke the rules. The static wavered like a breath being drawn in, and then it spat out more accusations, overlapping voices hissing at me. You didn't stop. You didn't help. You let us die. My hands tightened on the wheel as I forced the truck to crawl through the construction zone. Every instinct screamed at me to floor it, but the barricades were too tight, the gaps too narrow. I clenched my teeth, whispering to myself like a mantra. Just get through this. It's not real. It's not real. A sudden, icy draft swept through the cab, and I froze. Something was behind me. My breathing quickened as I glanced into the rearview mirror, and my blood turned to ice. They were there. The boy and his sister sat huddled together in the sleeper berth, their wide eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The girl clutched her stuffed animal to her chest, while the boy stared at me with an unnervingly calm expression. "Why didn't you stop?" he asked, his voice soft but cutting, the question slicing through the oppressive silence like a blade. I couldn't respond. My throat had closed up, and the only sound I could make was a shallow, choked gasp. Before I could process what was happening, the cab door slammed open, and the man from before, the one with the wrench, climbed into the passenger seat. Blood streaked his face, dripping from his hands, and his twisted smile stretched too wide, almost inhuman. "You let me kill her," he sneered, leaning in close. His breath smelled like rust and decay. "And then you just drove away." I whipped my head around, expecting to see the woman he'd killed. She was there, standing outside my window, her lifeless eyes fixed on mine. A smear of blood trailed down her temple, and her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, as though she were trying to speak, but couldn't find the words. "No," I whispered, shaking my head, trying to dispel the hallucination. "You're not real. None of this is real." But they didn't go away. "You broke the rules," the boy said again, his voice louder now, filled with anger. "You left us here." "I didn't." My voice cracked, and I struggled to find the words. I didn't leave you. I didn't know. I couldn't stop. The figures began to close in, their voices overlapping, bombarding me with accusations and cryptic taunts. You always do this, don't you, Sky? The woman whispered, her voice low and venomous. Running away. Looking out for yourself. You think the rules don't apply to you. The man laughed, tapping the wrench against his palm. How many times have you left someone behind? How many times have you failed? I couldn't breathe. Their words stabbed into me, dragging up memories I'd buried deep, mistakes I'd spent years trying to forget, the friends I'd let down, the bridges I'd burned, the people I couldn't save. No, I croaked, shaking my head violently. No, that's not fair. That's not your fault, the boy interrupted, his voice cold. He leaned forward, his face inches from mine, his eyes boring into me. Isn't it? I slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt. My heart thundered in my chest as I gripped the wheels so tightly my fingers ached. Stop, I screamed, my voice raw and ragged. I'm not responsible for you. I followed the rules. I did what I was supposed to do. The figures froze, their expressions flickering between anger, confusion, and something else. Something almost like fear. I didn't make this road, I shouted, the words pouring out of me like a dam breaking. I didn't trap you here. Whatever happened to you, it wasn't me. And I'm not going to let you punish me for it. The boy's grin faltered, and for a moment, his face looked strangely blank, almost doll-like. One by one, they began to fade. The boy and his sister dissolved into wisps of shadow. The murderous man crumbled into a fine black mist, and the woman outside the window disintegrated like ash in the wind. I was alone again. The cab was silent except for the low hum of the engine, but the whispers on the radio hadn't stopped. They'd grown louder, more insistent, like a chant. Keep driving, they murmured, their voices weaving together into a haunting melody. Keep driving, Sky. I pressed my foot to the gas, the truck lurching forward once more. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was anything but calm. I didn't know where this road was taking me, but one thing was clear. I couldn't stop now. The headlights cut through the thick veil of darkness, illuminating nothing but the endless stretch of asphalt ahead. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than I realized, my knuckles white as bone. The whispers on the radio had grown faint, but their weight lingered in the air, pressing down on me like a heavy fog. I hadn't seen another car or sign of life in hours, if hours even meant anything anymore. Then, like a mirage, a road sign emerged from the void, its lettering faint and chipped, barely legible in the beams of my truck. Welcome to population. The population number was smeared, the paint weathered down to a ghostly blur. The sign leaned precariously to one side, as if it had been forgotten for decades, left to rot like the rest of this godforsaken place. A sick sense of relief flooded me, despite the eerie state of the sign. I was close. I had to be. The warehouse appeared soon after, its hulking silhouette rising from the darkness like a decayed monument. The building was massive, but it sagged under its own weight. The roof partially caved in and the walls streaked with rust and grime. The loading dock jutted out at an angle, the faded remnants of company logos barely visible through the layers of dirt. I parked the truck, the engine groaning to a stop. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the ruin before me. This was it, the destination my manager had insisted I reach. This was where the high-paying job had led me, but there was no one here. No forklifts, no workers, no lights or movement, just an empty warehouse collapsing under the weight of time. A chill ran down my spine as realization crept in like an unwelcome guest. I climbed down from the cab, the ground beneath my boots soft with years of neglect. I circled the trailer, expecting, I didn't even know what. A foreman? A delivery crew? Anything to explain what was happening. But there was nothing. When I opened the trailer doors, the cargo inside was gone. The trailer was empty. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The job had been a lie, a setup, a trap. I climbed back into the cab, slamming the door shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't stay here. I didn't care what was happening anymore. I just had to leave. I started the engine, and the radio crackled to life with a burst of static that made me jump. Sky. The distorted voice sent a shiver down my spine. It was familiar, but wrong. Warped and twisted like a recording played too slowly. Sky, it repeated, dragging out my name. You broke the rule. The voice was my manager's, or something wearing his voice like a mask. "You're one of us now." "No," I muttered, shaking my head. I slammed my hand against the radio, but it wouldn't turn off. The voice kept going, low and haunting, worming its way into my ears. "You can't leave. You're part of the road now. Keep driving." The headlights illuminated the highway ahead, but something was different. The road stretched on forever, curving and looping back on itself in impossible ways. I pressed the gas pedal, desperate to escape, but every turn brought me back to the same endless stretch of pavement. The warehouse faded into the distance, only to reappear moments later as if mocking me. The radio crackled again, this time filled with faint laughter. Children's laughter, twisted and hollow, echoing in my head. I screamed, slamming my fists against the wheel, but there was no use. No matter how far I drove, how fast I pushed the truck, the road kept folding in on itself, dragging me back into its dark, endless grasp. I don't know how long I drove, minutes, hours, days. Time had lost all meaning. But I began to change. The fear and anger faded, replaced by a strange, heavy calm. My hands no longer trembled on the wheel. My chest no longer ached with panic. I became part of the road. Now I drive eternally, a shadow of who I once was. Sometimes I see other vehicles in the distance. Other drivers like me, caught in the highway's grasp. And sometimes I catch glimpses of ordinary drivers, the ones who haven't broken the rules, the ones who will pass through this cursed stretch of asphalt untouched. They don't see me, not really. To them, I'm just a ghostly figure, a faint silhouette behind the wheel of a truck that shouldn't exist. But I see them. And I wonder how long it will be before they join me on the endless highway.